Tom Pratt joining us again up front. Thanks, Tom. Talking about the Shortjaw Shortnose Cisco project.
All right. Yeah, so I call it a deepwater Cisco update, but we're going to talk a lot about names here maybe over the next 20 minutes. Really, I have to acknowledge Owen Gorman from the USGS. This is his talk, and I wish he was here to give it today, but he is in Germany hugging his latest grandchild, so I'm sure he's having a lot more fun than being here anyway. So I wanted to give a primer here about what we're talking about when we talk about the deepwater Ciscos in Lake Superior. So these are endemic species flocks that used to occur in all of the Great Lakes. So by endemic, I mean they're only found in the Great Lakes. So there's a lot of interest from the biodiversity conservation side for these fishes. The lower Great Lakes have pretty much lost almost all of their diversity. Lake Superior has managed to maintain theirs. And there's a lot of interest in restoring that diversity in the lower lakes to try to retain some of the ecological function that these species play. And so we've already seen that. There's bloaters being stocked into Lake Ontario. There's people are trying to get broodstock for kai to try to reintroduce that into the lower lakes as well. So a project that Owen started about 5 years ago now to look at trying to understand what was remaining in terms of the diversity in Lake Superior. They were matching up morphometrics and genetics, and they had a really incredible finding 3 years ago where they took genetic samples from Lake Michigan back in the 1920s and 30s, and we were told that one of the species that we thought was extinct was actually still extant in Lake Superior, so that is the short-nosed Cisco. So that finding has resulted in a flurry of further activity the last couple years where we've tried to do a broader look at how common this species is in Lake Superior. So right now we have 4 species identified based on that work, that morphometrics and genetic work. We have Cisco and bloater, which are the 2 most common species in the nearshore area. Ciscos are shallow, bloaters are our most common deepwater Cisco. We also have kai, which is the offshore Cisco that Dan talked about quite a bit. And then we have this short-nosed Cisco. We used to call it a short-jaw Cisco, but the genetics tells us that we were wrong for the last 80 years or so. So that's kind of where we are. We think we might still have blackfin and short-jaw, but right now those remain unresolved species in the lake, and that's part of the work that's ongoing, is we're trying to see if we can get enough samples to figure out if those species still exist in Lake Superior. So, like Fritz, my second talk today is more of a fun one. I'm just to talk about what we caught this summer. So we had 3 surveys for deepwater Ciscos, 1 in Canada, 2 on the US side. We used these small mesh gill nets. These are kind of the historic gill nets that were used in the 50s and 60s on the lake. They're multi-filament nylon nets, very long, 1,800 feet, 6 300-foot panels. You can read the mesh sizes there. They're small mesh. And we fished them very deep because we're mostly interested in the diversity of these deep water Ciscos. We know what a shallow water Cisco is, so we kind of start around 40 meters and go deeper. So the first area I'm going to be talking about is the one that my crew fished up in the northeastern part of Canada, so off of the city of Marathon, or maybe town is more likely what we should call Marathon. We had 14 net sets there over a 10-day period. Owen kind of threw me off here. I'm looking, we didn't shallow deep, but we fished deep. He just changed what he called deep on me. So we had nets that were our average depth of 118 meters. So we were not fishing shallow. We were targeting these deep water fish still. We captured the stars, represent nets that we caught short-nosed Cisco in. So 11 of our 14 nets, we captured short-nosed Cisco. And here's what that data looks like. For those that remember the sampling we did in 2023, more in the Thunder Bay area, we captured about just under 300 Ciscos in the same amount of effort. Here we caught a lot more Ciscos, so we had just under 800 Ciscos in our 14 nets. The most exciting thing, well, there's a couple here. We caught 96 fish that we called short-nosed Cisco, so just under 100 short-nosed, which is tremendous. We had a pretty equal split of bloaters and kai, around 40% of the catch for each of those species. Again, as we heard Dan talk about earlier, and our data really matched up with this, those Cisco's we were catching were those 2002 year class. So they were 15 to 20 centimeters long. They were in our 1.5-inch mesh. Our survey occurred in late June in a cold part of the lake, so they hadn't really put on their growth spurt for the year yet. But we saw lots of fish at lots of depths in those 1.5-inch meshes that were Cisco's. The other highlight I think that will be really interesting is we caught 20 fish that we were pretty sure were blackfin Cisco. So this is one of those unresolved forms, and I'm really interested to see when we get through the metrics and genetics whether that separates out as a cluster or not. So that lab work will be ongoing in the USGS lab in Ashland over the summer, and so we haven't got any of the data back yet, but those fish will be worked up soon. Just a couple of photos of the work. Really have to thank Lisa O'Connor, my biologist here, and Bill Gardner, my technician here, for the long, hard days. These are not easy projects to work. We have probably average 10-hour days. I know we had a 14-hour day when we had to bring food into the boat at 10 at night because we were starving. So hard work. But I really like this picture of Bill on the Kelso because John Kelso was the scientist who first hired Bill to work in our group. John passed away a number of years ago. They named a shift after him. And so Bill was really excited to this was his only opportunity to work on the boat. And he retired this winter, so Bill was really happy, and I'm really happy to make Bill happy. So I also wanted to point out, here are a couple of folks from the Royal Ontario Museum, Nathan and Sarah. Like I said, there's a lot of interest in these deep water Cisco's because they're endemic. Lake Superior is the only lake that has Kai. We'll be the only lake that has Shortnose in the world. And so they came out to do some collections for the museum, and we were happy to host them for a couple of days. The next project will move to the U.S. side. This was work done in the Apostle Islands in August. Again, there were 8 nets set here. You can see this area roughly from what you saw in Ian's talk this morning. Same kind of areas. There were nets set across all 3 depth strata, and you can see there were 2 nets with the stars that caught Shortnose Cisco. Those were the only 2 Shortnose caught in the entire survey. So, but Owen was still really, really excited about this because these are the only Shortnose that he's ever seen in the Apostles in his lengthy career. So, pretty good news story to have them move back into this area. Here you can see that the catch was dominated by bloaters, so over 75% of the catch were bloaters. The Apostles are a bloater factory, I think, and that's by far what they mostly see in that area. I think that's all I wanted to say there. Again, some photos of the crew. Owen really wanted me to point out Keith Peterson. Keith is the retired chief engineer of the Kai, but he lured him out of retirement for the survey. He put the nets together and helped folks understand how to fish them properly. Again, as I mentioned, these are the old school nets with like floats and leads, and they are horrible to work with, so having somebody that knows what they're doing is extremely helpful. So, and then the last cruise took place in Keweenaw Bay on the east side of the Keweenaw in September. Same number of net set, 8 here, but instead of 2 locations, 7 of the 8 locations came up with Shortnose Cisco. And 49 Shortnose were captured in total in this survey. Again, huge numbers of Cisco's were captured, just under 900 in these 8 nets. Dominated again by bloater, which was 70% of the catch. And again, just some photos of the happy folks that were working. I think these photos really show how many people it takes to operate these surveys. These fish get treated like gold when they come out of the water. Because of the morphometrics that we're doing on them, we want everything to be as intact as possible, including their scales. So it takes a long time to pull 900 Cisco's out of these gill nets, small mesh gill nets, when you want to preserve them as well as possible. So these are big crews, long days, quite a bit of money, but again, we think it's worth it. So I just wanted to show you where our efforts have gone the last 2 years. So since we rediscovered that there were Shortnose Cisco in the lake, we put our effort in on the north shore of Canada in 2023 from Cloud Bay through midway through Nipigon Bay, and then those 3 locations that I just talked about this year in 2024. When we look back in time, so some of us have been working on Cisco's in Lake Superior since 2006. The red dots indicate areas where we've captured short-nosed Cisco. So you can see that they are broadly distributed. On the US side in all this time, they're pretty rare though, so less than 5% of the deep water catch is short-nosed Cisco. For some reason, we always see a little bit higher percentage on the Canadian side, around 10% of the deep water catch, but they're still relatively rare compared to the other Ciscos. And I'm just going to end the talk by walking through each of the species. We've given workshops to most of the crews on Lake Superior, so the people that are going to be out there handling the fish so that they can get more comfortable in identifying them. We think we've done a pretty good job. When we're done with the workshops, everyone leaves pretty confident in their abilities to distinguish these fish, and so I'm going to see if I can do the same thing with the audience today. So I'm going to start with Cisco. So Cisco is the shallow water form. It is the target of the commercial fishery. It's the fish that most of you have probably seen. It is kind of elongate in its body. It has many long gill rakers because it's a planktivore. It has really short pelvic fins, so they typically only go back 50% of the way to the anus, whereas some of the deep water Ciscos go much longer. It has a relatively small eye given the fish's size, so this is a pretty long fish, just under 40 centimeters, but pretty skinny, looks like a pelagic fish. Next to it is a bloater. Bloater again is our most common deep water Cisco. It's found in pretty shallow waters, so 30 meters, 40 meters, all the way out to 120 meters pretty consistently, so it covers a huge depth range. It's got a much deeper body, as you can see. Its eye is much bigger for its size than the Cisco eye, but it's actually a relatively small eye compared to some of the other deep water Ciscos, which you'll see. And in fact, most of its characteristics are in between that of the other deep water Ciscos and a Cisco. So it has lots of gill rakers, but they're kind of a medium length. It's got medium length fins that go about 70% of the way back to its anus. Its eye size is big, but not crazy big. So yeah, it's the most common fish we see certainly when we're fishing these kind of deep water small mesh gill nets. You contrast that with a kai. I'll start with the kai on the right. Kai is the offshore Cisco, again quite common in offshore waters. It is our smallest deep water Cisco, but it has a huge eye, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell because the pupil gets really big, so it makes it look even bigger. But no, Ciscos, their eye size is remarkable given their body size. It also has the longest pelvic fin, so you can see there that this fin runs almost all the way back, like 95% of the way to the anus. So it has, and it also, if you were to open it up and look at its gill rakers, it has very short, very few gill rakers. It obviously fills a very different ecological niche than either bloater or Cisco. Beside it, I have what I call a blackfin Cisco. We'll see if I'm right. Blackfin Ciscos look a lot like a Cisco in terms of their body shape. They're a little bit deeper bodied, but they have a very similar body shape to Cisco, but they come out of 100 meters of water. So this fish came out of 118 meters of water. And their eyes are much bigger than a Cisco, and their gill rakers are actually longer than a Cisco. I don't know what it eats, I don't know what it's doing out there, but we saw this form repeated a number of times in our work this summer in the northeast part of the lake, so I really hope that genetically and morphometrically we can maybe confirm that this species is still extant in the lake. And then I'm going to end the talk by our two most confusing Ciscos. Now Owen put these labels on. I'm not sure why the short-jawed Cisco gets to be so deep-bodied and fat and the short-nosed so skinny, but it's really hard to tell these fish apart. They both have big eyes. They both have very similar gill rakers, pretty short, not very many of them. Their pelvic fins are very similar length, again, like 80%, 70-80%. So this is the big conundrum. The genetics tells us we have short-nosed Cisco in the lake, and that short-jaw Cisco is an unresolved form. The good news is over the past 2 years, we've captured around 200 of these fish that we think are short-nosed, short-jaw Cisco, part of this group. And I think when they go through the morphometrics and genetics that they're going to go through, I hope that we're able to resolve whether or not this is one species or two. But I think given the genetic data that we have that suggests, you know, the fish from the lower Great Lakes and the fish we have currently in Lake Superior are short-nosed cisco, I think that's what that will be the name that sticks if there's only one species that comes out of this. So to quickly summarize, short-nosed cisco are widely distributed. We've seen them around the lake since 2006, but remain a rare species. Our dominant deepwater cisco is bloater. Our dominant offshore cisco is kai, and then cisco is the most common shallow cisco that we have in the lake. Shortjaw and blackfin cisco remain unresolved, but I hope with the samples we've collected the last 2 years that we'll be able to maybe change that message in the future. And I wanted to stress this last point. We've talked about this at the last tech committee meeting, but the USGS lab in Ashland and my lab here in the Sioux are willing to identify those hard to identify ciscos that may appear in your surveys, in particular those that show up in the Ciscoette survey, which does fish these small meshes at great depths. We hope that your crews can tell these fish apart on their own, but if they can't, we're happy to look at frozen samples in the future. So that's it. Thanks very much.